Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is an interview with Anjali, a CFP and CPA firm owner in Chicago, Illinois, at least for now. Anjali got her start on the tax side of things before making the shift into financial planning and ultimately making the leap into firm ownership just over a year ago. So you'll hear us talk in detail about her decision to start a firm and honestly how much of a challenge it was to make that decision, but ultimately why she is glad that she did so before having her first baby just over a month ago. Anjali has a really strong niche market and is really focused on building a business that supports her great life, which means working virtually with a limited number of clients and is actually allowing her and her husband to move back home to Southern California this summer. Anjali is a wonderful example of staying focused on your great life and building the business to support that life. Towards the end of the episode, we talked about how she is actually splitting a paraplanner with two other financial advisors in her study group, which I think is just awesome and a model that other planners may want to follow. So be sure to listen all the way through the episode to hear the details on that. As always, you can access the show notes and additional resources at xyplanningnetwork.com/53. And don't forget to sign up for XYPN 16, our national conference, which will be held in sunny San Diego, September 18th through the 21st. If you join the VIP group at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP, we will be posting some major conference ticket discounts as a thank you for your involvement. So without further ado, here's the interview with Anjali. Hey, Anjali, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me.
I can't believe I was able to get you this week. I almost feel bad, but you said you have help in town. You just had a little one.
I did. She turned 1 month on Wednesday.
Congratulations.
Thank
my
you.
gosh. Isn't it just, it's such a fun time. But for any new parents out there, you know, whenever you have help in town, that's the best time to get things done. So I knew you had the little one. I was going to try to schedule with you in like a month or two, and we'll talk about some of the transitions that you have coming up, but now seem to actually be the most calm time in your schedule for the next little while.
Yep, that's true.
So let's kind of start with, I guess, kind of how you discovered financial planning and kind of your career path into owning your own firm. So did you get a degree in financial planning, or kind of what was your degree in, I guess, to get started?
So my degree was actually in accounting, and I then got a master's in tax, and I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers for 7 years as a CPA before coming across financial planning. So definitely didn't know anything about financial planning. The reason I kind of fell into it was my husband was getting his MBA at the time and was taking a financial planning course, and he came home from class and he's like, "This is what you should do for a living." And I'm like, "Oh, let's calm down. What is going on?" So I started exploring it a bit more. I talked to a fee-only advisor locally here, and I thought, you know, this would be a good transition. I was getting kind of tired of the consulting hours, and I wanted to be able to continue utilizing my tax skills because I spent so much time obtaining that. But it was nice to have financial planning because I can still do the tax side, but now the scope of what I'm able to do is much broader.
So it sounds like you were doing tax work, but you said consulting. So was it individual tax returns, or were you on the business side? I guess, what were those 7 years like for you?
So it was definitely more corporate, Fortune 500 companies. And, you know, I say consulting because it's completely client service based. So, you know, I was working more on average 50, 55 hours a week. And then busy season would be anywhere from 60 to 80 hours a week. So when I was right out of college, it was fine to do that. But after 7 years, I was pretty much like, okay, time for a change.
Do people stay in that career long term? Because that just sounds like everyone's going to get burnt out so fast.
A lot of people leave. I think out of everyone that I started with, I don't know a single person that's still there.
Oh, wow.
So it's definitely kind of a weed out process. You know, you really have to be a certain type of personality and be willing to stick it out. And after a certain point, if you know you don't want to be partner, then it's time to move on because you kind of need to continue going up the scale. Otherwise, it's not really worth sticking it out.
Makes sense. So, all right. So you discover financial planning. Your husband says, "Hey, like taking this this cool course. What, you need to do this." How did you go about exploring, I guess, what financial planning really was and the transition that it was going to take to kind of make that shift over into financial planning?
So I talked to the person who taught my husband's class, and he was a partner at a fee-only firm out in the suburbs here. Talked with him for a while and really got like a good impression of the field itself. So I decided that I'm going to go ahead and just do the financial planning course. I did it through Northwestern while I was still working at PwC. And I decided if I go through the course and I enjoy it, then I'm going to go ahead and make the transition. So I did. At the time, they had an accelerated course. So it was every Friday and Saturday all day. And it took a year, and I finished in, I think, November of 2012, put in my notice, and I left. And right. So that was a big transition because I was, a manager at PwC. It was a good salary. And so I was essentially starting over again. So that was a difficult choice, but I knew in the long run I would be much happier.
So here you are working 40 to 50 hour weeks on a down week or maybe even more, and you're taking classes all day Friday, all day Saturday for a year. How do you maintain your sanity through that? Like, I mean, because there's a lot of listeners out there that are probably in that position of like, I already work 40, 50 hours a week. How in the world am I supposed to get to the CFP education? Like, how did you manage that?
So I actually went reduced at PwC at that point. I had a good relationship with the people I worked with. So, and they knew I was kind of looking outside and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I went down to a 4-day work week schedule. 4 days, I was still working 40 hours a week, so it was still a lot. But, I just kept in mind that this is something that I'm going to be happy with long term, and it's temporary, so just need to get through it. And I actually found the coursework to be really enjoyable, so it didn't feel as much like work anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's fair. That if it's education that you actually enjoy, it's less about, a grind, and it's more about just being excited to actually get in there and learn everything. And so, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's now the time to give a shout out to your husband, because I feel like, this had to be a joint commitment here, because that is,
yes.
I mean, that's a pretty significant year of work for you.
It's interesting. Like, neither one of us have really ever been full time in our careers, because my husband is a physician, but he went and got his MBA. So when that happened, he actually went part-time, and then I was the one working full-time. And then, when I decided to launch, he ramped up his schedule to be a 70% schedule because he also has a startup. So we've never really both operated in both of us being full-time working. So, which helps because we've learned to kind of manage on, the salary that we have. And we know that we're kind of investing the time and effort into our individual careers, and hopefully it pays off in the long run.
So can you share what his startup is?
Sure. It's a physical therapy equipment device that helps prevent falls.
Wow.
So it essentially mimics slips. And so the research shows that if you spend about 20 minutes on this device, it reduces your chance of falling by, I forgot what the percentage is, maybe 80% or more. And if you do it continuously every few months, you actually learn the reflex. So it's really tailored to kind of older individuals. His business partner is an engineer, so they've designed the device. It's definitely very slow going, but now they're actually getting traction, and there's university studies going on, and we're hoping they can start selling in the next year or two.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I thought my life was crazy. Okay. So thank you for making me feel like I have a normal schedule. So, okay. So let's kind of put some dates on this. So listeners, because
Sure.
So 2012, you make the decision, and you did your CFP coursework in 2012. And then did you sit for the CFP right after that, or did you wait?
I sat right after that. So I did the March date. And so between when I left PwC and when I sat for the exam, I was interning at a fee-only firm for free. And then as soon as I finished the CFP test in March and I passed, I got an offer with a large RIA in Chicago, and I started there in April 2013.
Okay, so April 2013, and I guess you've said here, so here
Chicago,
is currently
sorry.
Chicago. No, you're good. And I feel like anytime somebody says out in the suburbs of the city, like I think Chicago for some reason. It's just the way people talk about that city. Okay, so April 2013. So at this point, your husband is full-time physician, or he was going through his MBA at that point?
So at that point, he was working 70% and doing his startup at the same time.
Okay. Now, I like it when people say physicians working 70% because that's still like 70 hours a week, I think. So.
It's not for him because he works for academic hospital.
Oh, okay.
And he's actually like the director of the program. So it's nice because he can kind of set his own schedule. So it's not terrible. But yes, most physicians, a 70% schedule, they would be working crazy hours.
I remember one of my first clients was an anesthesiologist and she was working like 80-hour weeks. And I was like, well, can you go, can we reduce? And she goes, well, some of the part-time folks only work 40 hours a week. And I remember just laughing,
Oh my gosh.
And she was totally serious. She was looking at me like, what's funny? I think physicians have a very broad range of hours in the way that they work. So,
right. And it definitely depends on their specialty.
Okay, so March, April 2013, you go get your first job in financial planning. So what type of work were you doing? Because you have a lot of experience kind of coming over, but new to financial planning.
Right. So the position was actually geared towards someone coming right out of college. And then I happened to apply. And so the partner got very excited. But I will say it was a lot of grunt work. But I think that's any kind of first job, especially in a big type of RIA firm. There's been so many conversations where you just don't quite get the same opportunity you may want to get, but it is what it is. So, it was high net worth individuals. So the focus I felt like was more on the investment side than anything else. There wasn't really any sort of cash flow or basic financial planning we were doing because none of these clients were ever going to run out of money. So it was more like managing their investments, and it was more heavy estate planning. I was the only CPA and there was one other individual. So I did more tax planning for that firm because no one else really had that background. So that was interesting. But, after about a year and a half of doing that, I could kind of see that if I wanted to stick around, it was going to be a very long course to kind of make it to the top. And then whether the high net worth, kind of older clientele was who I really wanted to serve long term.
Yeah, isn't it interesting just how we've been given one career path, and it really is that, you graduate with your CFP, you get your first job, and you're going to work there for 10, 15, 20 years before you make partner working with older high net worth individuals. And that seems to be like the one path that we were all told existed. And I think that we all ran across. And for some folks, that's great. And, some folks get really passionate about that. You might have found a passion for doing tax planning for, high net worth folks. I was talking to a guy the other day. He loves doing estate planning for people with, I think, 200 million or more.
Oh, wow.
Because he just it's this giant puzzle and he just loves solving the puzzle. And I was like, that's awesome. That sounds awful. So you might have found that.
I'm surprised there's that many people with 200 million or more.
I know, right? I was like, how often do you do this? So you said about 18 months. So let's see, March of 13. So this is going into the end of 2014. And I guess at what point, or maybe even was it during your CFP coursework that you felt like, owning your own firm was kind of your path eventually? Like when did it start to kind of creep in that ownership might be an option?
I've actually been thinking that ever since I could remember. Like even when I was at PwC, I always knew long term I wanted to be my own boss. I tend to be the type of person that pushes back a lot. I like to push boundaries. And I used to get into a lot of arguments with the partners of my firm because I would get frustrated with how things operated. And I have no problem, speaking up and stuff. So
that, I'm sure.
Right. So I knew eventually being my own boss was what would make me really happy and kind of keep me to a certain career path long term. I just knew I didn't want to work for someone for the rest of my life. And so I think about even when I was at the large RIA, I didn't know if starting my own firm was a viable option because, the partners at that firm told me that, you can't make a lot of money in this field unless you service these high net worth individuals. Even when I was leaving, they couldn't figure out how I would ever make any money. So I mean, that kind of scares you because I'm new to this field. I really don't know. All I know is this AUM model. So if you run the numbers and you're like, okay, well, if I charge 1% of AUM and I want to make X amount, then this is how much I need to have under management.
Sure.
You kind of go through that rabbit hole and then you come out thinking, okay, I don't think I can do this on my own.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you and I have similar personalities with the whole, I was never afraid to push back and speak my mind, even when it was not asked for, or I was told to shut up.
Right.
So I'm curious, like, is this the only reason to go solo? I mean, was it really just that, you just wanted to be able to make the decisions? Is that why you decided to open your own firm, or was it more than that? I mean, was there, I don't know, a desire for flexibility or the desire to start a family, which you've done? Like, was there more to that decision than just, you and I being hard-headed and wanting to do things our own way?
I think so. I mean, when I decided I wanted to leave that firm, I actually interviewed at 5 other fee-only firms in Chicago. And the premise was that I wanted to be able to serve people my age. So I figured, let me see if there's another firm that, is servicing younger folks who don't have like a lot of the firms in Chicago have at least 250,000 minimum AUM, and I couldn't find one. So, and that was frustrating because I'm like, now what do I do? And it's funny, I was reading one of Michael Kitz's articles and he mentioned XY Planning Network and mentioned your name. And so I think that's when I signed up to do that, initial consultation to learn more. And then that's when I realized that, there is another option. So, I do push back and whatnot, but I'm also semi-risk averse. So the thought of starting a firm really made me nervous. So I really wasn't sure if that's the path I wanted to go. I figured if I could find a firm and kind of grow within it, I would be fine doing that as well. But, when there's no other options, you kind of play the card you're dealt.
Yeah, I see that with a lot of folks in the XY Planning Network, that many firm owners in XYPN probably would have taken a job if those jobs were available. And yet every now and then I'll come across older advisors that say, we're trying to, serve younger clients, but they just can't seem to get the offering out there and get it in front of folks that like yourself that say like, I'd love to find a position that doesn't require me to start my own firm that would give me, the ability to work with with your peers and do work that you're passionate about doing and be able to answer questions about student loans instead of Social Security. But
right.
I'm glad you said that about you being nervous, because I remember the phone conversation that you and I had.
Right.
I mean, this has got to be early 2014 at this point. So this is over 2 years ago.
We
were just getting launched with the XY Planning Network, but I remember being very frustrated with a conversation with you because I was looking at your situation on paper. You're like the perfect firm owner. You had the credentials, the experience. You had a significant other that had an income. So, personal income or personal expenses wasn't the number one stressor.
Right.
And you were nervous about it. And I remember just thinking like, how do I push this girl off the edge to do it?
I think you had me then talk to Sophia.
I did.
You're like, you have to talk to Sophia. So I talked to her and she's like, no, this is done. Like, you're doing this. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing this.
I guess I'm starting a firm.
And I did. I mean, I will say like having, a spouse with that income is a big relief. I give props to people who are starting their firms who may not be in a similar situation because having the worry about the money, I think that would have just put me overboard. So, we have my husband's salary and that was sufficient. And to be honest, like if you're in a relationship, you really have to have the other person supporting you. Otherwise it doesn't work out. So he is, the opposite of me. He is comfortable taking risk 24/7. So he was the one who really, after I talked to you and talked to Sophia and I sat down with him and he's like, nope, you're going to do this. He's like, this is perfect for you. You like do it now. We don't have, kids yet. We don't have tons of responsibility that we have to worry about. Like this is the time to do it. So I was like, okay, let's see how this goes.
I'm going to talk about the gender stereotypes. And I don't know if this necessarily applies to you, but I can remember having a conversation with Michael Kitces about you back in 2014. And I remember because at that time I was having tons and tons of conversations. And I remember, and I apologize to all the listeners out there, I hate gender stereotypes, but I'm about to lay one out there. And that was that, like, I kept having conversations, maybe it was self-selection who was calling me, but with all these guys that were woefully unqualified to start a firm. I mean, they had no money, they had no experience, they had no credentials, they had no business starting a firm, and yet they were gung-ho, they're going to go do it. And I kept talking to these highly qualified women that were just, like you, that just had everything in place that they could go do it, and they were just so nervous or terrified of starting a firm. Now, I've talked to the guys that were nervous, I've talked to the women that were gung-ho, but for whatever reason, I just have developed this stereotype just based on the conversations that I've had. And I don't know if it's a life stage thing, if it's if you're thinking about starting a family, nervous to, women are more nervous to start a business before having kids and guys aren't. I don't know what it is. I don't have any answers, but I see it time and time again. And I wish I had an answer in terms of, I think it's why ultimately we have a lot more men starting firms than women, which is a shame because if we look, and we can talk more about this, but if we look at your career now and your workload and the hours you're working and the flexibility that you have compared to, what you're doing with PwC, a whole big difference. And I think you're in a much better position to be a mom now, I would argue, than maybe you were just a few years ago.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's obviously like women with careers, there's always a little bit of an uphill battle for us, I would say. I'm also Indian, so I feel like I'm female and minority and working for a very, very large corporate environment. It was very much like older white male. So I had to work extra hard to prove myself. And Alan, you've met me, I'm like the tiniest girl ever. I'm 4'9".
Tiny.
So I'm super tiny, but I make up with it with a big personality is what I say. So, I always felt like being female and being a minority, I've always had to work harder to be taken seriously. And so that's kind of what drives me a lot. And when I switched into kind of financial planning and launching my own firm, it was the first time in my career that I felt like it wasn't a disadvantage anymore and it was actually an advantage. So, I
love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely true. I talk to a lot of, younger women who are thinking about doing this. And I tell them the same thing. I say, like, the population out there looking for financial advisors is very, very diverse. And people want someone that they can relate to, whether it's, I've talked to a lot of prospects who are women, single women, business owners who tell me, like, I want someone female. Like, I don't want to talk to an old white guy because I don't think he'll understand me. And, that's great. I really would love to try to promote more women and more minorities in this field. I don't know how to do that, but
I hear you.
Anyone who's thinking about it, especially if they have the background and credentials, like I think half your marketing work is already done because people will be drawn to you because you can offer them something that someone else may not be able to.
And, I know the old white guys out there, and I will be the old white guy at some point. I'll still claim young white guy status. But, like, I know we hear that. We think, well, I can work with a female. I can work with a person of color. Like, why does it matter that I'm an old white guy? And you know what? The answer is perception's everything. And whether you can connect or not, and whether you're a great plan or not, it really comes down to whether or not the prospective client feels that you're the ideal fit for them. And I'm trying to remember, I had to pull up the studies, but I have seen different statistics that, like, I think female prospective clients prefer, I think 75% prefer to work with a female advisor. Men are actually indifferent. People of color prefer to work with an advisor of color. So, we prefer, like you said, to work with someone who we feel will understand our situation a little better. But if we do the math, right? Women want to work with a female advisor. Men don't care. We need like 75% of advisors need to be female.
Right.
Yet we're at like 20%.
Right.
So if anyone has the answer as to how to recruit more women and minorities into financial planning, please let us know. We would love to do it, because XYPN is more diverse than many organizations, but not diverse enough. So always looking for those answers. So okay, so circling back, you decided to launch your firm in, I guess, early 2014?
Early 2015.
15. Okay. So when did you kind of start that process? How did you tell your firm that you were leaving to kind of go do your own thing? Kind of what did that transition look like for you?
Sure. So I left. So I told them in January 2015, and I worked under two principals at the time. So one of them was very encouraging, and he's like, no, I get it. He's like, you're ambitious. And he's like, so I completely understand that this is what you want to do. The other principal, he took it a little personally, which is always strange to me when people take like someone leaving personally, but it is what it is.
Right.
But no, they were very, very supportive. Everyone was very excited for me. I did get a few of the like, let's see if you can make any money. I'm wondering how you're ever going to do this type of a thing. I kind of brushed that off. So I left in January, and I actually had lined up a part-time tax job to be able to bring in some income while I was getting up and running. So I think that was about the time that I joined XY Planning Network, started the registration process, and then I officially launched June 2015. And then I ended up leaving the part-time gig September of 2015.
Okay, so it took you about 5 months from leaving your firm to when you were actually launched. So what type of part-time work were you doing? Because it sounds like you worked past tax season. So what did that side hustle kind of look like?
So similar to the work I was doing at PwC, more consulting, corporate side stuff. So that work is all year round. So I was working at a much smaller firm 3 days a week doing that. And so it worked out well while I was trying to get up and running. And then once I was officially up and running, I realized that, running a business is a full-time job, and I didn't want to keep taking time away from getting the business up and running. So that's why I made the decision to leave. But the timing was funny because I launched in June, and then in July, I found out I was pregnant, and then I left that job in September.
Oh,
so
man.
I was like, okay, let's see how this goes.
Too funny. Yeah. And I do think that, with being a CPA is a huge advantage, having that background, one, because financial planning is so tax heavy. I mean, ultimately, everything we do comes through a lens of taxation. But also, it is a great side hustle. And, if you're doing individual tax returns, you're doing consulting like you were doing, or even if you come from the audit side, there's always side hustle work. I feel like it's a great way to kind of transition in. But to your point, it does take away, we talk a lot about side hustles to get that side income coming in. And if you were single and having to pay all the, 100% of the household bills, maybe you keep that side hustle a little longer. But ultimately, it always comes down to this decision of balancing, growing your own business and focusing on your business versus, bringing in that side income. So I do want to, pause for a second. And for all the advisors out there that have ever come up to me at a conference and asked me the very innocent question of, what kind of financial planning do you do for people in their 20s and 30s? Anjali, do you mind if I ask, how old are you?
I am 33.
Okay, 33 years old. And in the last, 5 years, we've had, I'm not sure exactly when you got married, but probably marriage somewhere in the last decade. You've changed jobs. You've started your own firm. Your husband has gone back to school. You went back to school. He has a startup. You have a startup. You had a baby. We have an upcoming move that we'll talk about. And people want to know what type of financial planning we do for people in their 20s and 30s. And how many transitions have you experienced just in the last 4 or 5 years that a financial planner would be amazing to have on board to help think through all of these decisions and help on the financial side of things.
Right. I mean, and that's what I tell prospects. I say, like, someone who's going to give you like a 50-page document and send you on your way is doing you a disservice, because I'm like, up until pretty much you're in retirement, I'm like, your life is constantly changing. So I always tell people I do financial life planning. I'm there to help you through all of life's events. And, the scope of what I do is beyond just putting numbers into a system and generating retirement projections and whatnot. I have a client and he's in his early 50s and he's looking for a new job. So I said, do you want me to review your resume? And he's like, that would be great. I looked over his LinkedIn profile. I have another client. I helped a few of my clients negotiate their next job offer, so the scope can be very, very broad. And that's what I want. I want my client to feel like if there's some sort of change or something going on in their life, like I'm one of the first people they call to run things by. And so it's a very different model, from my prior firm where it was very, very numbers focused. It's much more personal. But at the same time, it's a little hard to communicate that because, it's very subjective. And a lot of people, unless they've had an advisor or had a little bit of experience, really don't know what to expect. So it's I can be better about communicating my value proposition. It's something that I think I change probably on like a weekly or monthly basis. and I'm a year in. So I think that's always going to be an evolving process.
I love it because you make such a great point that, I know a lot of advisors that would say, I would never get involved in negotiation of a job offer or a salary, increase or something like that. But think about the exponential, the compounding effects that are going to happen whenever even if you just help your client get a couple $1,000s more in salary, the long-term effects of that are huge. Like it's so critical. And these are the things that we do for young people. We do not do Social Security analysis and super complex investment plans or anything like that because it's not really necessary. We're doing a lot of this type of work. And this is, I don't know, it sounds like you're in the same boat as I am. Like, this is why we got into financial planning. It was these types of questions. It was not, how do I spend my money in retirement or how do I protect it, whenever I die? Right. It was these types of conversations that are so much fun.
Right. And I'm a little jealous of my clients who are younger in their 20s coming and using me because I'm like, I wish I knew about this and I had someone like that when I was that age because I think, it would make a big difference as to like what kind of position that my husband and I are in now. So, the earlier people get someone on board, I think it's just going to benefit them in the long run.
All right. So I guess let's kind of go through your current firm. So you're a year in. How many clients do you currently have that you've worked with in the past year?
So I currently have 14 retainer clients, but I've worked with about 18 total. So when I started, I was taking on clients, doing the kind of like a quick start for, $500 to $700.
Okay.
And then as I got busier and got more clients, I dropped that service offering. So 14 retainer clients. And then earlier this year, I am only taking on clients who want to sign up for both financial planning and investment management. So I'm kind of slowly evolving because for anyone listening out there, my goal is to tap out at kind of 30 to 50 clients. So I'm actually pretty selective on who I want to bring on. And I think there's a lot of articles and discussions around this that if you're kind of the solo person, you really are going to be capped out at like 100 clients. And so making that decision early on as to who you want to work with, I think is really key.
All right. So many gems in what you just said of the last 60 seconds. Okay. So just to clarify your business model, when you first launched, you were doing kind of these one-time quick start sessions, kind of a, one or two main topics that are really stressing a client out. And then were you doing financial planning and investment management separately, or kind of what was the fee structure on the planning side when you first launched the firm?
Sure. So when I first launched the financial planning, it was a monthly retainer. And then I had anywhere from like $100 to $300 a month. And I said like based on complexity. So most of my clients fell into like the $150 to $200 range. And then I was charging 1% AUM. So everything was very separate and bifurcated out. And I was getting a really wide range of clients. I had people like reaching out who were in their early 20s and then people who were in their late 50s. And there was not much consistency. And I was actually getting a little overwhelmed with that because everyone's situation is so unique that. And at that time, I think that's when the podcast first launched and you and Michael did one on identifying a niche, which I know the niche has been like overdone, but I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. And the sooner that you can identify what your niche is and aim at that, the more successful you're going to be. So I launched in June. I think I listened to that podcast in October, and I completely rebranded. When I first launched, I wanted to focus on physicians and business owners, just because of my husband's a physician and most of his entire family is. And then the business owner side, because of the tax background, it always helps. And so I completely rebranded my website. I listed myself on White Coat Investor, which is a physician blog. And from that point on, the prospects that I got were, I don't want to say better, but they were more in line with who I wanted to serve long term. So my prospect calls were much more productive, much more people who were like, it was already like half the sale was done because they knew my background and expertise. They found me because I have that expertise. So then it became more, is the personality a fit and do the fees make sense for them?
So for listeners out there playing the niche drinking game, you can take a shot. We've now said, niche 3 times. So in the VIP group, there's an ongoing game now that people drink whenever we say niche on the podcast. But I did not say it. Anjali said it. Let's just bring that up. Okay, so there's so many good things here. I'm trying to decide which direction to go. Okay, so just to clarify, because I want to be sure that I understand your fee structure. So currently, you're not doing the quick start sessions. If I'm a new client coming in off the street and I'm a physician, what is your fee structure and what services are you providing for that fee for new clients?
Okay, so my current fee structure is, if you're a single individual, it's an annual retainer of $2,400 a year, billed monthly or quarterly. If you're a couple, it's $3,600 a year. And then AUM or investment management is 0.75% of the assets under management. And so the new client coming on I now require them to sign up for both the financial planning, so the annual retainer plus the AUM. And I do charge a $1,500 onboarding fee.
Okay, so $1,500 up front, whether you're single or a couple. And then we have the ongoing fee of basically $200 or $300 a month,
right,
depending on, again, single or couple. And then we also have the AUM side, but they're required to use you for everything.
Correct. I have a few clients where I only do financial planning. And I will say I just don't feel like I can provide the same level of value or service when I'm not overseeing the entire process. Because even though the investments are not the only component of financial planning, it is still a big portion of it. So not being able to kind of advise and direct on that has made it a little difficult for those clients who are only signed up for financial planning.
Makes sense. And then are you doing tax returns for your clients?
I am not. It was something I looked into exploring, but tax compliance is a whole separate business, and it is a big time commitment. You can probably ask anyone in XY who does both.
Oh, yeah.
So I made the decision not to do that. So I tell my clients that I provide the tax planning side and that I'll work with their CPA to implement that. For my clients who are simple and they self-prepare their returns, I do a high-level review of that. But anyone complicated, I usually suggest that they use a really good CPA, and I have kind of my list of people that I recommend using. If they use one of my recommendations, I work with that person all the time. So it ends up being a really great way to align everyone's interests.
That makes sense. And I would assume CPAs love your clients because they're coming in probably with everything ready to go, as opposed to, most folks which are pulling together everything at the last second. So.
Right.
Funny. So, okay. So you're doing kind of this comprehensive service. So you have 14 ongoing clients at this point on retainer. Where did these clients come from? I mean, how did they find you, kind of you're 12 months in? I guess what's working from a marketing perspective?
So I am probably one of the few people. I don't do any marketing at all. The only marketing I do is I'm listed as a preferred advisor on White Coat Investor. And as of now, that's probably 95% of my prospect pool comes from that. I get about 10 to 15 prospect calls a month. And my goal is to bring on 2 new clients a month. And so up until I had the baby, I was meeting that fairly easily. I'm taking May, June, and July off for new clients just while I transition into this new aspect of my life. But
of course,
yeah, that's where I'm currently at. From a fee perspective, I broke even in my business in December, and then as of January, I was profitable. So I feel lucky in that respect.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Isn't it just an amazing feeling that first time you're like, I I made money. Like, even if it's like $10, like I didn't go backwards. I don't have to pay out of savings anymore.
Right. It's nice when you see like the business account balance going up every month instead of like having to keep putting cash into it. So
that's good to know. So 6 months in is kind of when you stopped going backwards and started going forwards. And I would assume, obviously, taking a little bit of a hiatus here with a little one, and rightfully so. And so, obviously things will continue to ramp up after you kind of dive back in. But okay, so 6 months into breaking even, and I think that's pretty darn fast. I mean, it sounds like you're running pretty lean and mean. I mean, do you have an office space that you're renting?
I don't. So I operate a virtual practice, so my clients are kind of all across the US. I spend money on kind of the technology platforms that I use, but that would be the biggest expense. And then I recently brought on a paraplanner. So between those are kind of like the biggest costs. But I do think it really comes down to once I identified the niche and kind of the clients coming in, that's when I really saw a turn in my business. And I am more Gen X focused than I am Gen Y. So I tend to attract clients that are more in their like late 30s to early 50s. That's kind of my sweet spot. They're a little bit more established in their careers, a little bit more complexity. And that's kind of the niche I like to serve, because with my kind of heavy background, like that is a lot more appealing to me. And I feel like I can add a lot more value versus, someone right out of college. They don't really need like this slew of services that I'm going to offer to them. And it would be a lot more expensive for them. So this is kind of where I think is my sweet spot that I've developed. So
no, that makes sense. And we get really hung up on, Gen X and Gen Y. Ultimately, we named it the XYPN Network because we wanted to bring financial planning to the underserved or completely unserved generations, from 20 to basically 55 that the fee-only industry has pretty much ignored. But, if you're working with physicians, it's kind of hard to work with Gen Y physicians because Gen Y is like turning 36 this year on the very old end. So most of them are barely out of medical school by then. So that makes sense that you're kind of following with your niche. So why, I guess, what led your decision to operate a virtual practice? I mean, is it kind of where your clients were coming from, or was there something that you said, look, this is just the type of business I want to build?
So mainly I wanted to be able to be location independent. Alan, you and I talked about this a little bit. My husband and I are originally from Southern California. And so we've been always wanting to move back there at some point. So when I launched, I decided I'm going to keep it completely virtual so that if we ever do decide to move, I'll be able to do that without any sort of interruption in my business. And it's great that so much technology has come up over the past few years that have really made it feasible. Even now I have, clients locally in Chicago who signed up with me, partly because they wanted someone local they can meet. And then once we started doing video chats, they're like, actually, we don't need to meet in person because this is so much more convenient to just come home from work and turn on my computer. And I said, exactly.
That's awesome. So,
it is.
So the big move is coming up. I guess, how did you communicate that to your clients, especially the local ones?
So I've just started telling clients, and there hasn't been really any issues because, most of my clients, we've already had a few meetings scheduled. So they're very comfortable with, the video platform. And, my parents are in California and my husband's entire family is out there as well. So, just letting them know that, hey, with the baby, it makes sense for us to relocate back and be closer to family. And, the nice part is that, my clients, I actually was a little worried about telling them I was pregnant because I didn't know how they would react. And I was worried that they would leave me like, how dare you? Like, you're not going to have any time to spend on our stuff. But everyone has been so supportive. Like, I got cards and gifts from them, and it's so sweet, and a lot of these people have become friends of mine, they're as invested in my happiness and well-being as I am in theirs. So it's really been great and rewarding.
It is hard to put any type of value on what you just said. I mean, to be able to work with clients that you love and that love you, the clients that you enjoy meeting with so much that they become friends, that are supportive of you, kind of, I'll say, living your great life. And I remember that was how I communicated, the move from Wisconsin to Montana to my clients was, look, my job is to help you live your great life. I've got to do the same. And if I don't, this probably isn't going to work out long term. I didn't lose a single client over the move, and it doesn't sound like you're at risk of losing anyone either.
So far, no. Knock on wood.
No, I understand. And some of there may come a time where some of those relationships decide that, yeah, we need someone local, or maybe you have to, make the commitment to fly back to Chicago once a year and meet with a few people, but it's not like you're not meeting with them in person right now anyway. So, as long as you're staying in touch and good communication, I don't see it as an issue.
Right. And I think I make it very clear that the way that this would move forward is it's going to be video conferencing. I have prospects locally who would reach out asking, can we meet in person? And I never will meet in person on the first meeting. I always say, let's do a call first. I want to make sure that everything that we go over is what you're interested in and what you're looking for. And then we can meet in person, because it gets to a certain point where, time is really valuable. So you have to be mindful of how you're spending your time and making that sort of decision. So I don't really have any clients who would have any issues if I'm not local to them. It's why I only have, out of the 14, 4 that are in Chicago. Everyone else is kind of all across the U.S.
So of your 14, 4 in Chicago, 10 are kind of spread out other locations.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense. I love it. And I think it's just, as financial advisors, we tend to get so caught up in our client work that sometimes we forget to structure the business in a way that supports our life. And if the flip side had been you took everyone that came in the door and you had a ton of local clients you had been meeting with in person, this conversation would be a whole lot harder.
Yes.
To say, hey, I've decided to move and I'm not going to be able to meet with you in person anymore. So now we've got to, be able to meet via video, conferencing. That's a whole different story.
Right.
So what is your kind of long-term plan? So you said 30 to 50 clients. Do you expect to have employees at that point? I mean, is that a full-time job for you, or do you think that's part-time? Kind of what's your vision for, 3 to 5 years out as you're approaching that client number, or even sooner if on the low end of 30?
Right. So I do want to establish this as a lifestyle practice. I will say the first year it has not been. I've worked more this past year than I did at PwC. I just think that's what will happen when it's your own business and you're getting up and running. And I will say having the baby has really put time into perspective, because I don't have, endless free time to just focus purely on the business and the clients. So that's why I'm kind of making this strategic decision that I will need to cap out at a certain point to be able to maintain kind of that level of quality, and that it's very hard to service clients really well all on my own, especially with the baby. So that's why I have brought on a paraplanner part-time. I actually share her with 2 other advisors on XY Planning Network. So that's been working out really well. And I kind of see that continuing if the 3 of us get busier, bringing on someone else and looking for someone who really wants to kind of grow in this field. The current paraplanner, she is looking to do what I'm doing, launch her own firm eventually and getting that experience. But if, someone comes in and kind of wants to grow internally, I want to be able to offer that as an option. I think the way current firms kind of structure how they're going to keep young advisors is flawed, to say the least. So trying to figure out a model that'll work long term would be great. So definitely needing to bring someone on for me was very important, because I found it hard, even with 14 clients, to be able to service them fully, especially with a baby in the picture.
Oh, sure. So we've had, I believe, the other 2 folks on the podcast in the last month. So we've had Chris and Scott Frank, and they've both mentioned this, and we have not dug in. So I'll let you do the honors of giving a few more details. So the 3 of you.
So it's actually me, Scott, and Trace that are sharing.
Trace. Okay. Trace Tisler. Okay. We'll have to have Trace on at some point to kind of speak from his side of it as well. So he owns Epic Financial out of, is it Indianapolis? Is that right?
Ohio.
Okay. Sorry, Trace, if you're listening. Okay. So the 3 of you said, you're in a study group together, correct? And you said,
we are.
Hey, we're all 3 growing. We all 3 need a paraplanner. And so I guess we'll just get one together. Tell us about that process, because I think there are a lot of advisors out there that could do this and just didn't even realize this was an option.
Right. So Jennifer is our paraplanner, and she actually reached out to Trace, and I can't remember when, it was probably last year, looking for a financial advisor. And she was right out of school, just started working. So Trace was like, I'll just help you out and do this for free. And he mentioned her to us, and he's like, she's really great. maybe someone we want to think about hiring down the line. And she was working for like a traditional firm, not very happy there. So it came to a certain point where we were kind of in our businesses. We were feeling like we were at capacity and we could really use the help. But none of us really from a cash flow perspective could afford to hire someone full time. So we decided, why don't we try to hire this person amongst the three of us? And it worked out well because we are all DFA advisors. We all use e-money. So kind of having all the technology aligned really makes a big difference. And it's been great because bringing her on has kind of forced the three of us to become a lot more organized and to create more processes and be more efficient. And I think in the long run, it's just going to really help us be better advisors because we're forced to really look at how we're currently doing things and is there a better way to do it.
And no better way to, than for her to say, hey, Trace is doing it this way. And I think it's actually a really good way to do it,
exactly.
And for her to then go Trace and say, well, this is how Anjali's doing it. So, and I agree. When I heard my first paraplanner, that was the first time I wrote down a process of anything, because I was just like, whenever you do it all yourself, you just do it all out of your head and run it through email and that sort of thing. That was the first time I started, really being sure all the notes were taken and files were where they needed to be and everything had to be scanned in. So even having a paraplanner a few hours a week, I think kind of whips you into shape a little bit in a good way. So
it does. So we do like a weekly call with her on Mondays just to touch base. And then the three of us also talk offline without her just about what kind of processes we want to put in place or things we can do so that she can help us kind of all move toward running more efficient and better businesses so that we're not spending so much time kind of doing things that are not as much value add and we can really focus on the client service side of things, which is what I think everyone who's doing this wants to eventually get to if they're not already there.
Well, fantastic. Well, any planned changes? Obviously, you've got the move and that sort of thing on the personal side, but in the business, do you see any major changes that you're evaluating, or do you feel like you've kind of trial and errored your way over the last year to kind of the foundation that you want to lay kind of going forward for your business?
I am going to raise my fees again. So this will be the third fee raise I've done. And I feel like it's a little bit on the higher end, but I kind of realized that the type of clients, the ones I've brought on more recently, I've had a few, selling their startup businesses or, physicians who make really great salaries and things like that. So I've been lucky. And so I am going to raise my fees, and mainly because I am starting to realize the value that I provide, and that with the comprehensive tax planning on top of everything else, and if I'm going to cap that at 30 to 50, what's kind of the number I want to be with each client. And I think that's really important when you're figuring out how to do this, is to really think about where do you want to be long term and kind of back into that, like how much do you need per client in terms of revenue, and not to make it just a money business, but that is important because that'll really help tailor kind of how you're going to market, what type of clients you're going to bring on and things like that. So I kind of reassess my fees every few months. And I'd go ahead and just test it out by implementing the new fee structure. And if I don't get anyone, then I know that where my pricing lays. But, if I can get to where I want to be, that's just better for me, especially because I'm planning to keep my firm pretty small.
So I'm curious, are you planning to raise fees on existing clients now or at some point, or they get grandfathered in to lower rates?
Yeah, they're going to get grandfathered in. So it'll just be for any new clients that come on board.
Makes sense. It's certainly easier to raise fees on prospects than it is for existing clients.
Yes, it is. That's like a battle I don't even want to try.
Yeah. In many ways, I feel like the AUM, because you kind of have that side that goes up over time, that covers for not feeling like you've got to raise your monthly fee. Because, we probably should be raising fees 3 to 5% a year to cover cost of living, inflation and things like that. But that's a tough conversation to have. And I know at XYPN, we haven't raised our fees on members, since we launched, because I don't want to have that conversation either. So I totally understand.
Exactly.
So I guess it's kind of, as we're closing down, I'm curious if you could go back to maybe the Anjali that talked to me in early 2014, kind of evaluating launching your own firm and that sort of thing. If you could go back and tell yourself one thing, one thing you wish you had known then that you know now, what do you think that one thing would be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say don't worry about having everything figured out right away. No matter how much planning you do ahead of time, things will change as soon as you launch, because I feel like on a weekly basis, you just have to kind of evolve as you go. Because clients are different, the business is different. So, anyone who, and I had a bad habit of this. It's why it took me 6 months to launch, is because I felt like I had to have everything perfect before I launch. And I now realize I didn't. I needed to just get some of the main things set up, and I should have just, launched like in April instead of June. And, because a lot of it I had to figure out as I go. And even the stuff that I thought I put in place really wasn't relevant, because you just never know how things will evolve until you're actually kind of knee deep in it.
Fair enough. Live in beta is what I have heard. And I totally agree. If you wait till it's perfect, you'll never get it done. So sometimes it's okay to just give it a shot.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, thank you so much for taking the time out of newborn schedule to be on with us today. I am amazed that I only heard her like twice, which is crazy. My little one would be standing here talking to me the whole time. But thank you for taking the time to be on. This was awesome.
This is great. Thanks, Alan.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.